Today we're going to look at solving radical equations. So a radical equation is an equation that contains a radical or a rational exponent. So a radical or maybe something like that, or a rational exponent, which would look like this. So we have three steps. The first step is to isolate the radical, which just means get it by itself. The second step is to eliminate the radical or rational exponent by raising it to some power, and then after we do that, it will look like an equation that we know how to solve. Okay, so example 1, we have the square root of x equals 7. So if we think about this, this is saying some number, when we take the square root of it, will give us 7. So if you think about this logically, you can probably figure out that x has to equal 49, because the square root of 49 is 7. Now, the way we would show that mathematically, though, is we want to get rid of the square root sign. So if we want to get rid of that square root sign, we're going to have to take a set of parentheses, put it around it, and then square that. The opposite of taking the square root is squaring something. Now, every time you square a square root, those cancel each other out, and you're just left with whatever's underneath your radical sign, which is x. And then the opposite side, 7 squared, 7 times 7 will give us 49. So x is equal to 49. Now, similar on the second one, we have 11 equals square root of y divided by 10. Well, we want to get rid of that square root sign. So in order to do that, we're going to square it. If we square one side, we have to square the other side. And every time you square a square root, those undo each other. That gets rid of it. And you're left with whatever's underneath the radical, which is y divided by 10 in this case. And then 11 squared, 11 times 11 is 121. Now we just solve that. So the right side's a fraction, the other side's not. So I'm going to take that 121, put it over 1, and then we're going to cross multiply. So 121 times 10 is 1,210 equals 1 times y is just y. And there's our answer. So example 3, we have 3 plus the square root of x equals 10. Now the difference on this one is the square root of x isn't by itself. You're adding that 3 to it. So the first thing we have to do here is to get the square root by itself. So we got to subtract this 3 first, which will cancel out. Now we'll give us square root x equals 7. Now we can square both sides. So square the left to get rid of that square root, square the right. So the square gets rid of the square root, and you're left with what's under the radical, which is x. And then on the right, 7 squared would give us 49 once again. Okay, so example 4, similar to the last one. We have 2 plus the square root of 3x plus 2 equals 6. So once again, you have to get the radical part by itself. So we're going to subtract this 2 first. That will cancel out, and that'll leave us with the square root of 3x plus 2 equals 4. Now, you have to get rid of that radical symbol. So we're going to put parentheses and square it. Whatever we do to one side, we have to do to the other. That way, this square gets rid of this square root, and you're left with what's under the radical, which is 3x plus 2. And then 4 squared, 4 times 4 is 16. Now, we'll just solve this. So we'll subtract 2 from each side. So 3x equals 14. Divide by 3, since that's what's with the variable. And x equals 14 thirds. So example 5, we have 5 times the square root of b minus 10 equals 50. So once again, we have to get the radical part by itself. Now notice this time the 5 is right beside the square root, which means you're multiplying. So the opposite of multiplying by 5 is dividing by 5. That way these 5's cancel out, and you're left with the square root of b minus 10, and then 50 divided by 5 is also 10. Now we want to get rid of the radical symbol. So we're going to square whatever we do on the side we have to do to the other. That way this square gets rid of this square root, and you're left with b minus 10. and then 10 squared is 100. Now, we can solve this equation. So now we'll add 10 to both sides. So v equals 100 plus 10 is 110. So example 6, we have negative 55 equals negative 5 times the square root of 11x. Once again, you need to get that radical by itself, and that negative 5 is right beside the square root symbol, so that means we're multiplying it. So the opposite of multiplying is dividing. So we'll divide by negative 5, that way that will cancel, and that will leave us with the square root of 11x. Negative 55 divided by negative 5 will give us 11. So now you want to get rid of your radical, so we're going to square both sides. Once again, that square gets rid of the square root, which leaves us with what's under the radical, which is 11x, and 11 squared is 121. So now we can solve that equation. So divide by 11, x equals, so 121 divided by 11 is also 11. Example 7, we have the square root of 2 minus x equals the square root of x plus 12. So this time we have radical symbols on both sides. So we need to get rid of both of those. So we're going to square both sides here. Once again, the square gets rid of the square root, which leaves us with what's under the radical, which is 2 minus x. On the right side, the square gets rid of the square root, which leaves us with what's under the radical, which is x plus 12. Now, you're going to solve, but you just have variables on both sides. So we'll add an x to each side. Those will cancel out. So 2 equals, remember this is like a 1x plus a 1x, so 2x plus 12. Okay, now we're going to solve our two-step equation here. So we can subtract 12, subtract 12. So 2 minus 12 will give us negative 10 equals 2x. And then we'll divide by the 2 since it's with the x. So x equals negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5. So example 8, similar to example 7, we have the square root of 3x plus 7 equals the square root of 5x minus 3. So once again, the radicals are already by themselves, we just happen to have them on both sides. So we're going to square both sides. Then once again, when you square the square root, that goes away, which leaves us with 3x plus 7, what's under the radical, equals, same thing on the other side, the square undoes the square root, which leaves us with what's under the radical, which is 5x minus 3. Now we just have variables on both sides, so we'll subtract 3x to get the variables on one side. That will cancel, so 7 equals 5x minus 3x is 2x minus 3. Add 3 to both sides. 7 plus 3 is 10 equals 2x. Divide by the 2 since it's with the variable. And x equals 10 divided by 2 is 5.